Throughout history, humans have tried to push the boundaries of science, but sometimes these attempts turned into real nightmares. Secret laboratories, brutal experiments, twisted methods of research. We dive into the darkest chapters of history, human experiments that send chills down your spine. Unit 731. Today we'll talk about one of the darkest chapters in human history, the activities of Unit 731. This Japanese military unit conducted brutal and inhumane experiments on living people in Manchuria during World War II. The main goal of Unit 731 was to research biological weapons and human physiology. However, their methods of experimentation were shockingly cruel. Prisoners of war, including Chinese, Russians, Koreans, and even some Europeans, were used as logs, a cynical term the staff of Unit 731 used to refer to their test subjects. One of the most horrifying aspects of their work was related to studying infectious diseases. People were deliberately infected with plague, anthrax, cholera, and typhus. These experiments helped researchers understand how quickly diseases spread, how they destroyed the body, and how they could be used as weapons. To study the effects of these diseases on internal organs, prisoners were often subjected to vivisection without anesthesia. They also experimented with frostbite. Victims were forced to stand in freezing conditions with wet hands and feet until their limbs became blocks of ice. Then, the frozen limbs were thawed to study the tissue destruction process. Other experiments included testing weapons. Prisoners were exposed to gunshot wounds, grenade explosions, and flamethrowers. They were tied to poles and subjected to different types of weaponry to determine the damage radius and improve military technology. A separate area of research was the testing of poisons and chemical substances. Prisoners were given food or water laced with toxins to study their effects on the body and how quickly death occurred. Tens of thousands of people fell victim to these experiments. After the war, the members of Unit 731 avoided prosecution, as the United States granted them immunity in exchange for access to their scientific data. These events serve as a grim reminder of how far science can go when stripped of morality and humanity. If you're interested in learning about more lesser-known chapters of history, subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. Guatemala. About a shocking and tragic experiment that took place in Guatemala in the 1940s. This case became an example of serious violations of ethics in medicine and remained in the shadows for decades. It all began in 1946 when the U.S. government decided to conduct an experiment to study how penicillin affects venereal diseases, like syphilis and gonorrhea. Penicillin was just beginning to be used in medicine, and researchers wanted to understand how to effectively apply it to treat these diseases. The problem was that, to do this, they decided to use vulnerable populations without their consent. The experiment involved prisoners, mentally ill individuals, soldiers, and even sex workers. All of them were deliberately infected with syphilis, gonorrhea, and other diseases through sexual contact, bacterial injections, and other methods. The most horrifying part is that none of these people knew they were becoming subjects in a scientific experiment, and they did not give their consent to participate. Researchers were trying to understand how penicillin could prevent or cure these diseases. However, some participants were not given treatment, despite the availability of penicillin. This led to severe health consequences and even deaths. Over 1,500 people were involved in the experiment, and around 80 of them died. The experiment remained secret until 2010, when historian Susan Reverby uncovered these horrifying facts. The public was shocked, and soon the U.S. government issued an official apology. President Barack Obama and Secretary of State Hillary Clinton expressed regret and apologized to the people of Guatemala for this terrible violation of human rights. This case became an important lesson for the medical community. Stanford. The Stanford Prison Experiment is one of the most famous and controversial psychological studies, conducted in 1971 by psychologist Philip Zimbardo at Stanford University. The experiment aimed to examine how social roles and the environment influence human behavior, shedding light on how ordinary people can commit unethical acts under certain conditions. The study involved 24 volunteers, mentally healthy college students, who were divided into two groups, guards and prisoners. The basement of the psychology department was transformed into a makeshift prison. The prisoners were given uniforms and assigned numbers instead of names. while the guards received uniforms, batons, and sunglasses to conceal their eyes. Initially, everything seemed calm, but within a few days, participants began to fully immerse themselves in their roles. The guards displayed sadistic tendencies, humiliating the prisoners by forcing them to perform pointless tasks, such as cleaning toilets with their bare hands or standing in uncomfortable positions for hours. The prisoners experienced extreme stress, depression, and even emotional breakdowns. Some refused to comply, which only escalated the guards' abusive behavior. The experiment, originally planned to last 2 weeks, was terminated after just 6 days due to the escalating cruelty and the severe psychological impact on participants. This study demonstrated how deeply social roles and power dynamics can shape behavior. It revealed that ordinary people could commit unethical acts when given authority and freed from accountability. However, the experiment faced harsh criticism for its unethical nature and the questionable validity of its findings, as participants may have been influenced by subtle cues about expected behavior. Despite the controversy, the Stanford Prison Experiment remains a significant lesson about the nature of power. Smallpox. I'll tell you about one of the most important experiments in medical history, which saved millions of lives. This is the story of how Edward Jenner created the first vaccine against smallpox. In the 18th century, smallpox was one of the deadliest diseases, killing huge numbers of people. But Jenner noticed that those who had contracted cowpox, a milder disease, did not catch smallpox. In 1796, Jenner decided to test this theory. He took material from cowpox blisters and injected it into an 8-year-old boy, James Phipps. The boy got sick but recovered quickly. A few weeks later, Jenner exposed him to smallpox, and the boy didn't get sick. This experiment proved that cowpox could protect against the deadly disease. That's how the first vaccine was created, and thanks to it, smallpox was completely eradicated by 1980. Jenner's experiment laid the foundation for modern vaccination, one of the greatest milestones in medical history.